The Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, On Screen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Roerig. Everybody, and welcome to On Screen, the official podcast of the Total Screen. My name is Tyson.
My name is Will.
And today we are going to be talking about Evil Dead Rise. In full spoilers, we also have some stuff to go over in our news segment, including some trailers and some casting for Superman Legacy that we're going to go over some of that stuff. And we also have our On the Horizon segment where we talk about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. And that's where we're going to get started with On the Horizon.
On the horizon.
So this week on the Horizon, what's coming up this week? Well, got a little show coming up called Justified City Primeval. It's coming on Tuesday, July 18th to FX.
Show of the year. Just give it the Emmy for best drama already.
Just you don't have to watch it. Just the fact that they made it.
Just the fact that they made it.
Maybe we'll talk about that on the podcast. We'll see.
Perhaps.
What ends up happening. But we also have coming up on Thursday, July 20th, Tacoma FD returning on truTV. This is I think their comedy group's Broken Lizard, the same people that did like the Super Troopers.
Okay.
This is, I think, like the 4th or 5th season of the show. I've watched it. It's a really funny show. I just need to figure out how I'm going to watch it, because when the last season aired, I had cable, and I don't have cable anymore. I have to figure out how do you stream this show?
That is a conundrum.
But that is coming on truTV on Thursday, July 20th. Also on Friday, July 21st, Praise Petey is coming to Freeform. This is a new animated comedy about a girl trying to modernize her father's cult. So, funny concept, but you can never tell. Anime comedies, they don't even need a good concept. It's all about the character work, you know? So, who knows if this is going to be any good. It's interesting that it's Freeform, though. That's not the kind of network I'd expect for this. Then, also on Friday, July 21st, They Cloned Tyrone comes to Netflix. This is the movie with Jamie Foxx and John Boyega. Has a very like kind of grindhouse look to it, like blaxploitation to it. But it's about like human cloning and stuff. It looks interesting. I remember, I think they showed the trailer at like, not this year's, but last year's Tadum event or whatever. And it looks really cool. The stuff they've done with Jamie Foxx on Netflix, he's done like a few movies for Netflix already, and some of them were pretty good. Like Day Shift was pretty good. That was the one about the vampires. That one was actually like a really good. What's interesting here though is that there's a lot of questions right now, and it wouldn't affect this movie because this movie was already filmed before it happened, but Jamie Foxx is like apparently had a stroke, and there's like a lot of things about his health that have kind of been in question recently.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, like hoping he pulls through, you know?
Yeah, he's been seen out in public, but people are like really analyzing, looking like, oh, it looks like he's only waving with one hand and all this stuff. And I just hope he's doing okay, because I'd like to see some more stuff at Jamie Foxx, and I hope that wasn't like a career killer for him. It looks like health-wise he's doing okay, but I just hope it wasn't a career killer for him.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Also on Friday, July 21st, Pikmin 4 is coming to the Nintendo Switch, so people can be excited about that. I just recently found out there's like a Pikmin-themed boba drink coming to a chain called Kung Fu Tea.
Really?
That's like a tie-in with Nintendo that they're doing, like a Pikmin boba drink of some sort. I don't know what's in it, or I don't know what that make of that is, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. Pikmin 4, Friday, July 21st, Nintendo Switch. And then also on Friday, July 21st, but coming to theaters, we have 2 big movies coming on the same day. It's kind of weird to have 2 significant movies releasing on the same day. Like, the companies kind of cooperate to not have that happen. But here we have Barbie and Oppenheimer opening on the same day.
Yes.
And, it's kind of fun. Like, they've actually, like, the people making the movies have been pretty good sports about it. Like, I think it was, like, Tom Cruise first, like, posted pictures of him and the director of, Mission Impossible. It's coming out, like, this Wednesday, I think, or like came out today, maybe. But it's, like, close to that. And they posted pictures of them holding up, like, pre-ordered tickets tickets for both Barbie and Oppenheimer. It's kind of like a way of saying, like, yeah, we're going to be in competition with each other, but we all support each other.
Yeah,
and then Margot Robbie and the director of Barbie, like, posted pictures of them doing the same thing for the same movies, for Mission Impossible and Oppenheimer. So, haven't seen Christopher Nolan post one yet.
Yeah.
He's like, those movies are trash.
Some behind the scenes, like, rumors say that Christopher Nolan is kind of salty about Warner Brothers putting Barbie on the same day as Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
And is not so enthusiastic to post pictures of him, going to see Barbie. So,
yeah,
we'll see.
That goes back to, obviously, Warner Brothers had a close working relationship with Christopher Nolan. He had been putting out basically all of his films through Warner, but after the lockdown fiasco with Warner putting all the movies day and date in the theaters, like, that caused like a lot of friction with Christopher Nolan, who is very heavily into no, you must see the movie in the theater on the biggest screen possible. And that caused like a big rift in their relationship. And so Oppenheimer is the first movie he's done in quite a while that isn't through Warner. So saltiness with Oppenheimer. I'm excited for the movie, but I'm kind of over Christopher Nolan as a person. I think I was like that with Tenet when he was like pushing that, and it's like, dude, we're still in the middle of a pandemic and you're trying to pull this shit. It's like, come on. Like, people are just trying to survive here.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But that is what is coming up on the horizon. And now we're going to move on to our next segment, On Beat.
On Beat.
So, for this week's On Beat, we've got some trailers to talk about, and we also have some casting news for Superman Legacy. Let's start out with the trailers. We saw the trailer now for Corner Office, which stars John Hamm, and it's kind of like this weird high-concept show that takes place in a office building where this character discovers like a secret office where he can be far more productive, but nobody else is acknowledging the office. And they say that when he says he's going to the office, he's just like standing in front of a wall and like just staring blankly.
Right, and it shows scenes of him like just standing there. So it's like one of these high concept. It's just like, is this his imagination? Is the office really there? What's going on? The thing about it though, like, it's like the tone and style, like it's got like this quirkiness to it. John Hamm's there. It's got the actor who plays Abed in Community.
Danny Pudi?
Yeah, Danny Pudi is in this in a supporting role, apparently. Again, it's hard to gauge how big people's roles are going to be, like, from a movie trailer. He's in a few scenes in this trailer. Again, trailers can be kind of misleading with that, but he is in this. It does seem to take a quirky tone. It's kind of reminds me of something like Office Space. But if it was crossed with like a psychological thriller.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of a show that I haven't seen, but one of the big Apple TV Plus shows, Severance.
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah.
a lot of people have been talking about. You know, it kind of like has a little bit of a vibe of that. I have not seen Severance, so I'm not saying that from any experience, just from what I've seen of like trailers and stuff like that. It kind of has like a similar vibe to that, just this kind of like weird high concept thing happening in like a really boring space, an office space, you know?
Yes.
So that's kind of interesting. I like John Hamm. I like Abed.
I like Danny Pudi. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and I like high concept stuff that's kind of can be fun and interesting and do different things to kind of like warp our brains a little bit.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We'll have to see what that ends up being like when it comes out. Next up, we got a trailer for Twisted Metal, which I know you're super excited about. First off, I have to ask you, are you a fan of the game at all?
No.
Okay.
But
So it's not like they ruined it. I'm so offended. It's like, it's coming from a different place than that.
Okay, so I will say, like, this trailer was better than, like, the full scene they showed at Summer Games Fest.
Yeah.
It was, that full scene with Anthony Mackie fighting Sweet Tooth. That was terrible. That was just like cringe. It's like, what are we
That
doing?
was bad, and the teaser was really bad.
Yes.
Before that, the one where it's just like Anthony Mackie like dancing or something.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that one was really bad. This looks better. Like, I think conceptually, I've seen stuff like this, but it's been kind of more stuff like on like that kind of grindhouse level of like kind of intentionally like cheesy horror elements, kind of grainy looking and stuff.
Yeah.
And this is like a kind of different take on this kind of, structure that I've seen before. I don't know.
This is definitely seems like it's leaning hard, trying to be more of a comedy than anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's a Peacock show, and most of that stuff is comedies.
Right,
on Peacock, so that kind of makes sense. But yeah, I think they're half-hour episodes too. So
which is this is I think they're half-hour episodes. So this is I guess leading into the absurdism of the premise, whereas in the video games they play it more straight.
So yeah, I mean, I think it looks fine. I'm gonna check it out. I think it looks like they kind of marketed this badly. Sweet Tooth was a little weird in the clip, it wasn't really into that, but who knows? You get used to the tone and what they're going for. I think the concept's kind of interesting, so we'll see, if they do anything interesting with that or not. But it looks like the kind of show that I'll check out and either keep watching or just kind of drop off after the first episode.
I was kind of surprised seeing Nev Campbell in this.
Yeah. This is why she couldn't do screen. that was a money dispute. Yeah,
that was a money dispute. Yeah, exactly. It's funny because I had seen Nev Campbell in literally anything, and it seemed like she only showed up to do a Scream movie, and now she's in this. So I good for her.
Yeah, this is the return of Nev Campbell.
Yes,
this is the Nev Campbell World Tour. Next up, we got a trailer for Wonka. This is our first trailer. I don't think we've even gotten a teaser for Wonka before. We've just got a poster, I think.
I thought there was a teaser before.
I don't recall. Maybe, but I didn't. I don't remember.
But this is a first full trailer we got for Wonka.
Yeah. And so I mean, it looks good. It looks cute.
It looks whimsical, which is what it needs to be.
Yeah, I was hoping for something just a little bit I don't want to be misunderstood, but a little bit darker. I don't want it to be misunderstood thinking that I wanted a mature adult, movie. It's obviously not, but I was hoping for something that kind of had an air of danger to it. I mean, obviously there's some Harry Potter influence going on here. It's some of the creators of Harry Potter, some of the producers are involved in this. I was hoping for that. When I say danger, I mean that, Not that I wanted it to be some super mature R-rated movie or something. Obviously not.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think the Harry Potter vibe is very intentional.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. They very clearly announced the producers of Harry Potter, in the trailer,
I think Warner Bros. Wants this to be as successful as possible because, I have a feeling they want Wonka to be a franchise and for this to spawn a bunch of sequels.
The one thing that really sold this for me was the very end of the trailer with Hugh Grant as an Oompa Loompa.
Yes, that was great.
Yeah, just playing an Oompa Loompa, but playing him like a gentleman.
It's would you like to hear the song? He's oh, no. He's oh, too late. Already started.
Yeah, once an Oompa Loompa starts dancing, you have to finish.
Yeah.
That's very funny. Just the idea of an Oompa Loompa as a gentleman is kind of funny.
Yeah, it is. It's I have a perfectly respectable size for an Oompa Loompa.
So that stole the trailer for me. The next trailer we got was Ahsoka, which looks incredible.
Yes,
I frequently will say when we talk about Star Wars stuff that I'm pretty much done with Star Wars. I just don't care about Star Wars. And when I say that, I say
just
the one exception. Yeah. When I say that, though,
looks tired.
Yeah. When I say that, though, the exception I always bring up is that Ahsoka looks really good,
Yeah.
And this is looking really good. It looks like a really good movie, and it's a TV show. So the production value is really up there. It looks really cool. Ray Stevenson looks amazing. It's really sad that this might be the last thing we see him in. I'm not sure if he has other stuff he's filmed before he unfortunately passed away.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
But it's, I love Ray Stevenson, and it'll be cool to see him in a real kind of domineering role like he appears to have in this, which is really what he excels at. So I'm excited to see him in that. I think everything looks really cool. The fighting looked awesome. The tone looked really good. It just had that right blend of the right level of violence without trying to go too far, trying to pretend it isn't Star Wars or something. It just has everything kind of seemingly at the right levels of what I would want from a Star Wars property when I actually still cared about Star Wars. So I'll definitely watch this. This is the one Star Wars thing that looks good to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And then lastly, we got our second trailer for Blue Beetle. There's no Batman is a fascist line in this one, so
no, yeah.
So this trailer's garbage.
Yeah, it's garbage. I mean, it looks like a fun movie. It doesn't look anything like extraordinary or anything, but I mean, it looks like it'll be a fun superhero film. I love the lead. He's great in Cobra Kai.
We got to see an actual antagonist in this. Like, we knew, like, the antagonist on, like, the corporate side, but, like, we actually got to see, like, who he's actually going to be fighting in this, which is cool. And they showed a lot of how he's going to be kind of dealing with the public. It's from the first trailer for Blue Beetle. It was a grab bag of certain things taken from, like, Marvel properties. It's like, oh, we're gonna take a little from, like, Shang-Chi here, and we're gonna take a lot from, like, Spider-Man here, you know? And they kind of were just taking things, and it's like, okay, this is the tone, this is what we're building. And, like, I'm not saying that to disparage it, because those are all, like, Shang-Chi was great. It was, like, probably the best movie of, our best original movie from Phase 4, you know? And Spider-Man is obviously, like, one of the best comic book characters ever. So, if you're gonna steal, that's who you want to steal from. For like the tone of this movie. But yeah, I mean, it looks cool. That's about the most I can say about it. Not knowing too terribly much about the character. I'm not finding myself interested in the AI voice of the suit. I think in the comics, isn't it supposed to be like just like a sentient voice or something? It's not supposed to be like AI or something.
I think so. But yeah, I'm not 100% on that.
So I don't know.
At the moment, I don't know at the moment.
The voice doesn't do much for me, that part of it, but
no, yeah, I agree.
I do like the lead, as you mentioned. I love him in Cobra Kai, so this would be I'm happy to see him get an opportunity like this and see what he can do with it. And the action stuff looks fun. Grandma with a minigun.
Yeah.
That is it for the trailers, but we still have some news to go over, and that is that there have been 2 casting reports that have come out for Superman Legacy. Not 2 castings, but 2 reports. One had 3 castings in it, and one had 1 by itself. First off, Nathan Fillion will be playing Guy Gardner, one of the Green Lantern iterations from the comics. I don't really know anything about Green Lantern, so I don't know if there's something you want to say about this casting.
Well, the casting is perfect. That's what I want to say.
Only thing I know about Green Lantern is that they had an amazing movie with Ryan Reynolds and Taika Waititi.
Oh, yes.
It's the greatest achievement put to celluloid in history. No, obviously. But I know Nathan Fillion. I just don't know anything really about that version of Green Lantern.
So some people are surprised that James Gunn is going with Guy Gardner, like a lesser-known Green Lantern, versus Hal Jordan or John Stewart, which are more famous. John Stewart especially because he was like the featured Green Lantern for like the Justice League animated series. Mm-hmm. A lot of people who were watching that on Cartoon Network at the time know that Green Lantern the best. So yeah, people were wondering, why Guy Gardner? And apparently James Gunn answered a fan on Twitter with, I really love the character from Justice League International, especially, but he also fits the story I'm telling with Legacy.
Yeah, I mean, Nathan Fillion's a bit older now. I mean, when we saw him in, Firefly and stuff and be like, oh, he'd be great in like a comic movie, that was like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
He's much older now. It'd be weird for him to be playing like a featured superhero character. And if Legacy, just going by the very name Legacy, and with a younger Superman and stuff like that, I think the implication is that eventually in the DCU, this new version of the DCU, we're probably going to have another Green Lantern show up.
Oh yeah, we are. There are 4 human Green Lanterns. There's like a bunch of alien Green Lanterns because it's an entire corps. It's like a police force, Mm-hmm. So like there's a ton, but there are 4 human Green Lanterns. We know there's Hal Jordan, John Stewart, Guy Gardner, and Kyle Rayner. I've
never even heard of Kyle Rayner.
He was like the main Green Lantern in DC Comics for like most of the 90s. Like he basically took over Hal Jordan's spot.
Yeah, in the 90s I was Marvel.
Yeah.
I was DC in like the late 80s, very early 90s, and then Marvel after that. So yeah, I just know nothing about Green Lantern. I know very little about, except for what I've seen in like, Justice League Unlimited or the Green Lantern movie, as I mentioned,
And Guy Gardner and John Stewart were always mostly like side characters.
Mm-hmm. Also in that same casting report, it was announced Isabella Merced will be playing Hawk Girl. I mentioned this to you before we start the podcast. Every time one of the Hawk characters shows up, I'm like, oh, they're such boring characters. Not to disparage the actors playing them or anything.
No, but, I agree. I never cared about the Hawk characters. The joke is like, was it Legends of Tomorrow had them as like, in like the first season? soon as that first season ended, got rid of them.
And it was like infinitely a better show. Like,
yes.
That first season is by far the worst season of that show.
Yes. And then like it became like a much better show. Solely because of that, but yeah, it's like they were never mentioned again.
So I'm always nervous when they announce one of the hot characters because I'm like, oh no, they're so boring. But it's James Gunn, so I trust in Gunn. I think he'll probably have a good idea of what he's doing with that, and he probably won't be diving too much into their story. It always seems like whenever one of the hot characters pops up, it goes right into their story, and it's like, yeah, the most boring story.
Right, yeah, and obviously it won't because it's not a Superman movie. Story. Yeah.
And then lastly, from that first casting report, we got Eddie Gathegi, I'm not sure, as Mr. Terrific. This character we also seen in the Arrowverse. He was on Arrow. He started out as playing. He didn't. I don't know if he ever even took the mantle of Mr. Terrific. We stopped watching that a while ago.
Yeah, I have no clue if he ever started actually calling himself Mr. Terrific in that show. I was like, I did not finish watching that show. The show was getting worse and worse as it went on, and I just hit a point where like, yeah, I don't really care what happens in the show anymore. So yeah, I have no idea. From what I watched, maybe he did at the end. I have no clue.
But he's a character supposed to be like very intelligent, hyper intelligent, and not with any abilities or powers, but with stuff he's made to augment his abilities. Kind of like a Tony Stark almost.
Yes, yeah.
But I guess not an asshole. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like a kinder, gentler Tony Stark. I don't know. But that's Mr. Terrific. And then we got another casting announcement more recently that Anthony Carrigan is going to be playing the character of Metamorpho. Again, I don't know anything about that character, but I do know Anthony Carrigan. He's in Barry. He was the standout character in Barry. He's hilarious. And he was also in the recent Bill and Ted movie, the Bill and Ted Face the Music. He was like the cyborg or robot that was like hunting them or whatever.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I love Anthony Carrigan. I don't know anything about Metamorpho. Can you tell us anything about him?
I don't know much about the character. I know that he is a weird looking character who his main power set is he can metamorphosize his body into any element and any shape. So if he needed to hit somebody with like a lead hammer, he could turn his arm into a lead hammer. Consequently, he's completely deformed. He's got like one half of his body is like colored pink and the other half is like red, or no, like orange. And then the rest of him is all like freaking chalk white.
Yeah, and is he like is he a hero or a villain or
he is bald, just like Anthony Carrigan. So he is a hero.
Okay. So I'm excited that Anthony Carrigan is getting work because he is a great actor and he's a really good comedic actor. And it sounds like this is a good role for him, something that he's going to be able to kind of just play off the weirdness of the character.
Yeah, it's one of those weird characters like Polka Dot Man in the Suicide Squad.
And James Gunn really excels at that too. Like taking these kind of really like absurdist characters and kind of making them interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
And, giving them kind of heartfelt moments that you actually care about, from these characters that like in wrestling terms would be like jobbers. The characters that you just, who cares, but like James Gunn can come in and kind of take them and make them interesting. He did that with a lot of the Suicide Squad characters and in Peacemaker as well. Interesting. Definitely interesting. This is all, these cast members are also, of course, joining David Corenswet and Rachel Brosnahan, who had already been cast as Soups and Lois Lane. So we didn't even talk about their casting. I think we had a bunch of other stuff we were going over when that casting announcement happened, but I don't really know much about David Corenswet, to go over that old casting news. But Rachel Brosnahan is in Marvelous Miss Maisel, and she is excellent in that, and she is basically Lois Lane in that show. This is very fast-talking New York woman, So I'm interested in seeing how they're going to play this out, what this is going to be like. But as I've said before, in James Gunn, I trust.
Yep, exactly. Same. I have no reason not to trust his instincts here.
And that is it for our news segment. And now we are moving on to our final segment, full spoilers. This week on Full Spoilers, we are going to be talking about the latest and most profitable entry in the Evil Dead franchise, Evil Dead Rise.
I feel like we love the franchise, but also like most profitable was never a high bar to cross. These movies were just like never mainstream.
It's a successful thing. I saw somebody write, oh yeah, they just sent it out to bomb in the theater. I'm like, it made like 150 million. And that sounds like a small number, but it's a 20 million budget movie, you know?
Well, yeah. The trick with horror movies is they're usually profitable because they're made so cheaply. Like, they're not huge, expensive budgets.
But even that's kind of a new thing. Like, 20 years ago, we weren't getting horror movies like we're getting them now. There's periods where we get lots of horror movies, and there's periods where we don't. And there's a long stretch of like the 90s where we didn't really get them.
Well, Scream resurrected horror film in the 90s.
In the late 90s,
Yeah, we weren't really getting a lot. It's because of what happened in the 80s. It's because they over-milked the slashers in the 80s, and people were kind of getting bored with it.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't really, the 90s, like, they really struggled to find anything that, like, really hit that same chord until Scream came out, which, shocker of shockers, is a slasher, but they were smart with it because they made
kind
it
of
like
satirical.
They made it like meta commentary on the genre, kind of commenting on, this genre is really stale, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
And then, like, I think in, was it 98 or 99, we got, like, the Blair Witch Project, which kind of didn't invent, but kind of, like, popularized the whole found footage thing, which was mostly used in horror.
Yes.
And
which I was never, like,
a
huge fan of the found footage, like, gimmick.
Yeah. I think the found footage movie that I absolutely adore isn't even a horror movie, and that's Chronicle.
Oh, okay.
I love Chronicle, and it's not a horror movie at all, you know, but it's found footage it's interesting because it had this big boom with all these people trying to imitate it, and then it kind of died away. And then more recently, like in the last 10 years or so, there's been like a lot of stuff that's kind of fallen into that found footage, mostly with like the Paranormal Activity movies and stuff that are kind of like aping on that style a bit and kind of doing their own thing. And so that's really taken off. And then recently, a combination of those kind of like ghost story kind of horror movies, along with like this new type of horror movie, or mostly new, which is called elevated horror, which is like the kind of stuff you're getting from A24 and, you know, stuff like, God, what's that movie called with Florence Pugh? The one where she goes to a Nordic country and it's all like flowers and stuff. I can't even think of it. But anyways, we have this whole kind of new type of horror movie with these elevated horror movies, and that's kind of become like the new thing.
Yeah, it's become the new thing. And I think, like, that's the thing. If you have, like, a smartly produced, you know, you have, like, a good script, you know, you're going to make your money back because that's what people want. And I think Evil Dead Rise fits it. The previous films of the franchise were not blockbusters. I mean, there's a reason that nothing was made after Army of Darkness until, like, decades later. It's because, you know, Army of Darkness did not do that well. It didn't perform to the way the studio expected. Mm-hmm. It's known to people like us who are genre fans and fans of, you know, Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi and stuff, but I bet, like, they're mainstream-wise, there's not a lot of people can attest to having, like, seen that movie or
there's a lot of people probably don't even know what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a lot of, and it's funny because, like, I'd say Sam Raimi is kind of a household name now.
Yeah.
He's not super household name, but it's because of Spider-Man, you know?
Yeah, it's because of Spider-Man. Yeah, Spider-Man is, like, the first mainstream hit that he directed.
Yeah. I mean, he's always done, like, it's not like Army of Darkness or anything like that is like a flop. It's just, you know, because it was still a pretty low budget movie, you know? It still did a good, decent return. It just wasn't a big movie. It wasn't anything that spread his popularity or spread the popularity of the franchise.
It wasn't anything on the success of, like, say, you know, what Nightmare on Elm Street or, you know, Friday the 13th were doing. Like, it didn't do those numbers.
Yeah. You know? But, like, in cult audiences, it might be like ahead of those.
Yeah.
As far as like cult popularity goes, the Evil Dead franchise is massive, absolutely huge.
Oh yeah, it's got a fan base, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And the thing about Rise specifically, I would guess like the last one they did well enough.
2013 remake.
Yes.
Which was, I believe it was just called Evil Dead. Whereas, so the naming convention, just to get that out of the way real quick, the original Evil Dead movie is called The Evil Dead. Then the second one was Evil Dead 2, and the third one was Army of Darkness.
Evil Dead 2
they don't
being
have
like
a shared naming convention.
Quasi, like, remake of the Evil Dead.
It's like the first act.
Yeah,
The
it's
first
so
act
weird.
of Evil Dead 2 is a remake of Evil Dead 1 with things changed. And it's a rights issue. That's what a lot of people don't understand is like they didn't have the rights to their own movie. So they had to recap what happened by recreating it. And then they just figured, well, since we're recreating it anyways, might as well just make a bunch of changes. And kind of approach it from a different angle. In a sense, you could say this was one of the first multiverse movies.
Yeah, it is one of the first multiverse movies. Yeah, so there's that. Then there was Army of Darkness, and like I said, must have done well enough. But the big point is, this was done on a budget, but this was not intended to be a theatrical release. This was intended to be on HBO Max, because the previous...
greenlit pre-David Zaslav at HBO
Yeah, the
Max.
previous administration at HBO, at Warner Brothers, they were betting heavily on Max as a streaming service, and they wanted to support it with original films that you could only watch by subscribing. This was part of that initiative, as well as Batgirl was part of that initiative.
And that Scooby-Doo movie, which, like Batgirl, was also just written off as a tax write-off.
Yeah, and when Discovery, the merger completed and David Zaslav took over, David Zaslav made very publicly clear he does not like the idea of spending money on streaming-only movies. He says if we're going to make a movie, it's going to be theatrical. Mm-hmm. And
he's okay with streaming series, we should clarify, but just not the movies.
Yes. And thankfully, I don't know at what point on the timeline this got converted into theatrical, but it was a very smart move on their part.
I'm just glad it didn't just get completely canned.
Yes. After watching this, absolutely glad that this actually got released. It would have been a damn shame if it did. People go on about Batgirl, I don't know what little we've seen didn't really inspire to me that it wasn't going to be anything more than mediocre. Maybe it's great. It's it's
Brendan Fraser and Michael Keaton, man.
I like both of them. Michael Keaton's presence apparently, didn't uplift the Flash that much. I'm just it's Schrodinger's DCU film now. It's simultaneously fantastic and crappy at the same time.
Yeah, because we don't see it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Once you open up the box, then you know if the cat is alive or dead. But we can't open up the box because it's a tax write-off.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tax write-off. So thankfully this movie did not meet that same fate, and that we can confirm the quality of this film, or at least I can. Yeah. I still don't know what you think.
So I really like this movie. There's a few things I'm kind of, iffy about, but that's because I'm such a massive Evil Dead fan.
I'm just gonna say, off the top of my head, I thought this movie was awesome.
Yeah, I do too. I love this movie, but like I said, there's things that I don't like just because I'm such an Evil Dead fan.
Yeah, you're more of a
things bother me a little
fan of this franchise than I am. I've watched these movies. I watched, the Sam Raimi films, and that's it. And this movie, but you're definitely more into it than I am. So go ahead and give me your list of grievances.
So again, before I get into them, I still love this movie.
Yes.
But I think there's only a few instances where this happened, but it just rubbed me the wrong way. When I think about what Evil Dead is, and I'm speaking specifically about the first Evil Dead, because this and the 2013 remake are continuations of what they were doing with the first Evil Dead. It's not trying to be horror comedy in the way that Evil Dead 2 is, or straight up action-adventure comedy like Army of Darkness is. It's not even attempting that tone. It's trying to be serious.
Not even
there's humor,
what they did with,
but it's
Ash.
the same kind of humor that would have been in the first Evil Dead.
Yeah, they're not even doing what they did with Ash versus Evil Dead.
Yeah, definitely not. They're not going for that kind of tone. Ash versus Evil Dead is very much Evil Dead 2, and this is very much Evil Dead 1.
I feel like if Bruce Campbell shows up, then it gets more jokey.
Yeah. Yeah, even though he was in, obviously, the first Evil Dead, which wasn't intentionally jokey. It was a low-budget movie, so there's things that are kind of funny about it. But most of the stuff, if there is humor in the original Evil Dead, it's very, dark humor. And that exists also in this, as well as the 2013 remake. Both also have dark humor in them as well. But it's not the same as the slapstick humor of, Evil Dead 2.
There's no
very different. This is a completely different tone. So, to be following what Evil Dead Dead is, to me, there's like a few tenets, and I think most of them they get right, dead on, which is the Deadites, they need to be like cruel. They're not just like demons possessing or something or doing, like they're mean, they're nasty, they're petty.
Well, the name of the franchise is The Evil Dead. Like, you gotta live up to that.
Yeah, but they're just like really nasty, like, and cruel, and they'll say like horrible things and try to do things psychologically to the people that they don't need to do. I mean, they could just come after them physically and exert violence, but they go out of their way to just be cruel in a different way. That's, I think, a big tenet of Evil Dead, and I think they got that down right. One thing that they kind of got, but kind of didn't, is that Evil Dead was all about, and this goes kind of like to Sam Raimi's philosophy when he was making the first movie, was about like coming up to the edge and going way over it. And you could look at Evil Dead Rise and go like, yes, it's very violent, it's very gross, it's very gory, it's very like savage and brutal and stuff like that. But there's certain things like, and the one in particular that I'll note is that there's a scene where the mother possessed attacks her daughter with a tattoo gun. And it's like right up to her eye, and then she kind of like marks down the side of her face instead. Like it gets like knocked away. That would have never happened if Sam Raimi was directing this. If Sam Raimi was directing, not only would that have gone into her eye, but it would have like gone up to 11, like in a way that you weren't expecting that made it even worse. And
it's super uncomfortable.
What I'll equate that to is, say, for example, in the first Evil Dead movie, there's a character that gets stabbed in the ankle with a pencil.
Yeah.
It doesn't just go into the worst possible spot in the ankle that's like the most horrifying place to stab the pencil there. But then it gets like rotated around. It's like digging in and being twisted around. It's that extra step. It's like they take you to that limit where it's like, oh my god, they stabbed her in that spot in the ankle. Oh my god. And then it doesn't stop there. It goes like another level beyond. To me, that's like a big tenet of what Evil Dead did as a horror film that was like so good for its time, especially, that I don't really feel it's in here. Like, I feel there's a lot of stuff that's brutal, but I feel like it isn't brutal in that same way. Like, it's not like something that happens and then goes to the next step. It's like, it's just something that happens that's brutal, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense? Like, am I just sounding weird when I'm saying that?
No, it makes sense to me. Yeah. You want more brutality in your Evil Dead movies.
Well, it's not just the brutality. It's like the idea of something's about to happen, and you're like, oh my god, that's gonna happen. No, it won't happen. Yeah, it's gonna happen. It happens, and you're like, oh god, and then it goes to the next step.
I think it gets worse.
Yeah, that's what I kind of feel like is a little bit missing here. Like, this movie definitely gets super brutal. I actually had a lot of fun. I was watching some reaction videos of it, like last night, of people watching it, and it's one of the best movies to watch reaction videos, because you get to just watch people squirm and just get so uncomfortable, and you just hear people just going like, oh god, as they're watching it, you know? Because it is brutal. It is like super brutal, and I mean, like, for example, we didn't get that tattoo gun going into that daughter's eye, but what we did get was that daughter like bleeding out of all of her orifices and then spitting out maggots and
you know, that was gross. That was wow. Yeah.
And then eating glass, you know, like we got like these things that are fucked up. It's just
like watching her eating glass, but then like it goes into like a close up of her throat and you see like the glass going down and it's like even like poking out of it at points. Man, it's super gnarly. Like, that is one of the points where they take it and they go to the next level, because they could just simply showed her like chewing on the glass and like that'd be it. Like, you get the point, but then like they zoom in on her neck and they get like all like really gross with it. So I would say that's one of the points where they took it to that next level.
Kind of.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
There's places they could have gone even worse with that I think, like I said, I think if Sam Raimi was doing this with the same context of like not making it funny, of making it like a serious horror film, I think he would have gone another level beyond that. He would have maybe like had her pull it out through her throat or something.
Oh, you know? yeah.
It would have been like that next step that you just wouldn't even think about being, you know, like so far beyond what you'd expect initially. But yeah, I mean, besides that like little nitpick, which is, that's a very like hardcore Evil Dead fan nitpick. It's like I don't know, Sam Raimi would have done this, the kind of thing, you know? Besides that, I really like this movie. I think it's really cool. I think the cold open was good. I think the title card for this movie is one of the best title cards ever. The way that Evil Dead Rise like rises up from behind the hills behind the lake with the girl like floating above the water. It's just one of the coolest title card moments I've like ever seen in any movie, period. It's kind of like one of those things where it's like when it happens, and it's funny watching reaction videos because everybody has that reaction too. Like, I remember thinking it was so cool cool. And then when I watched reaction videos of people watching everybody think it was so cool. So it's like, okay, it's affirming. It's like, I'm not crazy. This was an incredibly cool opening title card. It kind of reminds me, even though it's very different than it kind of reminds me of like the first time I saw 1989 Batman. And they had the whole scene where it's like, it's racing through something and you don't really know what it is. And then it pulls out and you see it's the Batman logo.
Yeah.
And that kind of was like, oh my God, that was so cool. And like how hyped that got me as a kid watching Batman. Just that opening title sequence, like how that worked out, you know? It's been a while since I've seen like a title sequence that's really blown me away like that, where I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But I really dug that. With this, the cold opening was pretty crazy. I like that they played on the idea of the Raimi like zoom style with the camera going through the swamp or whatever kind of thing from Evil Dead, and they made it like a drone.
Yes.
I thought it was a cool touch, especially because it kind of sounded like a fly, and it kind of had that like dirty atmospheric sound kind of scope that you'd expect from an Evil Dead movie, and flies being like kind of reminiscent of death, like in Dead Matter or whatever. And then you find out, no, it's not a fly, it's just a drone, you know? It was kind of like a cool touch.
It was a cool touch. One of my big complaints about the movie is that early on, I'd say for like the good first 30 minutes, it's a bit slow going because they're doing the work they need you to do. You know, they're building up the characters and the story and getting you invested in these characters before they unleash total horror on them. But one of the things they do in this that gets groans is like, you can tell like the filmmakers are worried about the audience getting bored by like there not being much horror in the first act, because there's at least 2 or 3 jump scares for like no reason.
Pointless jump scares, yeah.
Yes, and I just groaned. I was like, oh man, come on. Like,
to be fair, the original Evil Dead had a few of those too.
Yeah, but it's so corny and obvious. It's like,
like the sister visiting when she first shows up and she's like hiding and scares her sister, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then like when she's with like the little girl in the bathroom and she does like the jump scare, like with her hand in the tub, and it's like, you know, like nothing's like really there because nothing's happened yet.
Yeah.
Guys, you don't need to do this. It's cool. Just like, we trust you that there will be plenty of scary stuff in the movie. Just, you know.
Like I said though, to be fair, the first Evil Dead had that too. In the very beginning with the car, where they almost like lost control of the car and then they were like, oh, that's fine. Or like when they first visited the basement under the cabin and Scotty was like hiding and scared Ash, you know, like those kind of things. It's like the same kind of thing in that sense. I think that this movie successfully plays a lot of homage to the Evil Dead in like some ways that are kind of like, I think some people might miss it. Like, for example, the doll head with the fucking wooden stake coming out of it that the youngest daughter makes is a take on the knife with the skull on the end of the handle. That's in the first and second Evil Dead movies. It's like a play on that, you know?
Right, yeah.
So it's like things like that are just like, okay, that's really cool that they are paying homage in like this kind of subtle way. I really dug that. And I think in a way you almost have to do those kind of cheesy jump scares at the beginning because that was in the first Evil Dead, you know? It's like you're kind of taking that same framework.
Yeah.
In the same way that in the cold open they had it's starting out, like I mentioned, with the camera, kind of like it's going in like a swampy looking water and then it pulls around. And that's very much also like it is in, you know, the first Evil Dead movie, the very first shot you see.
Right, right.
So I don't blame it too much for that. I agree it's cheesy, but I think it's being done as an homage. One thing I thought was a little weak that I didn't like when I first watched it, and then I didn't really even notice it when the second time I watched it, is I'm all for Chekhov's gun. Which, for anybody who doesn't know what Chekhov's gun is, real quick, it just means it comes from a play, and the idea is that, like, you see the gun in the first act of the play, and that means by the end of the last act, that gun will be used.
Yes.
Know? That's what Chekhov's gun means. It means you're setting something and you're saying, okay, this is here. Now you as the audience know that this is eventually going to come into play. If you ever watch like Breaking Bad, they're really good at Chekhov's gun and Breaking Bad. Like it's setting up things like that constantly. But I think they kind of might have gone a bit overboard with that in this movie. Cause in that opening act where like as you were saying, there wasn't much happening. It's like, oh, the scissors get thrown under the bed.
Yes.
The thing I mentioned with the doll with the wooden handle that's like broken, that happens. It's like, okay, obviously that's going to go into somebody, you know? The neighbor even just talking about about getting his shotgun or something. That's gonna come into play. Like, you see the wood chipper when they go out to get the pizza and are leaving from the underground garage thing. You see the pizza, or the wood chipper and a chainsaw. And you're like, well, obviously those are gonna come into play. And it just feels like that first act of the movie, where nothing's really happening yet, is just Chekhov's gun after Chekhov's gun after Chekhov's gun. It's like setting up every single kill that's gonna happen. It's like even the bathtub. They had a bathtub scene to reference the bathtub scene that's gonna happen later. It's all set up for that eventuality. So that kind of bothered me a little bit. I just think it was a bit overboard. It made it too obvious. It was like kind of the opposite of the subtlety of the doll head thing, where that was like representing the knife in kind of a really subtle way. This was like very unsubtle. It was like very like, okay, yeah, I know exactly that those scissors are going to come into play. I know exactly that there's going to be an art scene involving that bathtub. I know exactly that wood chipper and the chainsaw are going to come in. It's, you know, all those things. It was a little bit too set up, I think.
Yeah.
But when all of those things happened, it kind of didn't matter that it was all like overly set up, because they're still like managed to be thoroughly shocking and horrific.
Oh yeah. They still, managed to be awesome. So it just, it doesn't matter.
So yeah, what were some of your highlights for this movie?
Oh geez, yeah. Like my highlights, obviously the climax with the Deadites all merged into like this one being.
Yeah,
chasing them through the garage. And
the writer-director for this is Lee Cronin. He described that apparently as like the most fucked up big family hug.
Yeah! And obviously like the climax, like with the wood chipper, and when like the main character, she gets like the shotgun and a chainsaw, which is a nod to like, Ash's most famous weapons.
Yeah, even gets the come get some line at the one point.
Yeah. And she like shoots the thing into the wood chipper. Like, that's an awesome heroic moment. She's like, just like a lot of the horrors, like really brutal. Like when the sister, like all deadite out, is like attacking the son, and she like puts the scissors right through his arm. Yeah. And she's like, that whole sequence is brutal.
Yeah. There's a few, because there's also the aunt getting it through her hand, the knife through her hand from the mother. And yeah, there's a few kind of like really brutal, like, impaling scenes, basically. Which is very fitting for Evil Dead, That's the kind of stuff you expect.
When they get into the elevator and it starts filling up with blood.
Yeah. Managed to be both an Evil Dead homage and a The Shining homage.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I like the way they did it, that the elevator fell because it went past its maximum weight.
Yes. Because they show they zoom in on the sign, the max capacity sign. Mm-hmm. And that's your clue.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it makes it better than if it just randomly fell, or if it just went to the bottom and unloaded or anything. Just the way they queued that up. And the editing on that scene was really good too, with it like cutting to the elevator falling down and hearing the ding before the doors open. Just like the way that was cut together was like real kind of like rhythmic in like a Sam Raimi kind of way. So
yes.
I dug that. One thing they didn't do in this movie, and it might have just come off as cheesy in this kind of a horror movie that's kind of referencing more the original Evil Dead than the other ones, like Evil Dead 2 or Army of Darkness. They didn't have the crafty invention scene.
No, they didn't.
Like in, Evil Dead 2, it was when he made the chainsaw into something he could mount on his hand.
Which is fine. You don't need to do that anyway. Like, it would have been like really corny.
Yeah, I think it would have been too corny to do it.
It would have been too corny. It would have been too corny because it would have been really corny to like make the character out that now like she's suddenly Ash. She should like obviously be her own person. She's a survivor, but like a different kind of survivor. Like,
if I remember correctly, they did do one of those scenes in the Evil Dead remake, the 2013 one.
Yeah.
It was more like subtle. Like, it wasn't like he was making some crazy invention. She didn't say groovy when she finished or whatever. It was like a more, it was a more subtle, but it was definitely a reference to those crafting moments. It's funny to consider it like in video game terms, like a crafting moment, But yeah, like we didn't really get that in this movie. I guess the closest to a crafting moment would be the family merging when they combined. I guess you could call that the crafting moment for this movie. I really liked a lot of the gore scenes in this. I think they did a good job with the stuff with the sister, where she was like, blood was was coming out of her eyes, and it was just very goopy and thick. I think that added a big part to the effect of it. And she started like throwing up the maggots. It was like, oh man, this is just, she's heaving. It's like, oh, they're doing this right. Like I thought they did that well. But I think the thing I like most about this movie is it's that aspect of cruelty that the Deadites need for an Evil Dead movie, and the shit that the mom was saying. You know?
The Deadites are just, the Deadites are just like great horror movie villains, and this movie, it gets that perfectly. And coming up with the conceit, making it so the Deadite is like somebody really close to the survivors or the victims, adding that level of connection there just makes the horror even worse, you know?
Yeah. Well, you add in kids, and then you add in close relations, and the cruelty just gets really ramped up.
It's kind of different. It's kind of different than, like teenage friends hanging out at a cabin, and like, there's the familiarity and the connection, but it's not as strong of a connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They really ramped it up by making that connection, making it like a family thing, you know?
Yes.
I really liked her cruel dialogue. What the best line in the whole movie is one of the lines she says. It's in the trailer too. It's in I think in the Red Band trailer. I'm not sure if I think it's in both trailers actually, but it's the mommies with the maggots now.
Yeah, that's in the trailer. That was in the trailer. Yeah, exactly.
It's such a good line. It's so cruel and mean and so like gross and just kind of like, I don't know. It's just so perfectly phrased. That one's just nasty. All the comments about the sister being like a groupie whore, and like knowing that that's something that even as sisters that she would say to her kind of jokingly to mess with her, and is now just like adding an extra level of cruelty to it that makes it like hit that much harder, I think is like really well done. The one comment she made about saying she, like, they said, like, what happened to you? And she said, I'm free from you titty sucking leeches or whatever. It was like, Jesus.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's like absolutely cruel stuff.
Yeah. And that's what a Deadite should be. So I really dug that. I think that the actress playing the mother, Ellie, Alyssa Sutherland, she was in the show Vikings, I think just nailed it. Just completely nailed it. Like that character just did such a good job. I think in like an interview where she was talking about how she's like doesn't watch horror movies because they terrify her. She did such a good job of being terrifying. Yeah, just fantastic. I think all the kids all did an excellent job as well. It's always risky with young actors, especially if you're trying to put them in like a traumatic position and have them sell it, but I think they all worked it well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Did you notice the scene where the mother ate out the one guy's eye and then spit it into the other kid's mouth?
That was like a really cool kill.
Did you notice that, or did you know that the Foley sound of the eye being chomped out, that was like Bruce Campbell eating an apple?
Oh, I had no clue. I mean, I don't know how
That's not, you would only know that being hearing about it,
Right, yeah, exactly.
I heard about that. I thought that was funny. He had two kind of credits in this, or besides his producer credit, he had two other ones. One was that, and then he was also a dissenting voice on the recording. When they had the recording and it was like, you could tell it was like an open forum with different Catholic priests or whatever, and you could hear some of them like yelling, going like, this book should be burned or whatever. One of those was Bruce Campbell.
Nice.
So, you have to have the little cameos in there. Bruce has to have a cameo, or it's just not right.
Right, yeah, exactly.
I think I should go over some of the little details from research about this movie at this point.
Okay, go on, yeah.
So a lot of this comes from comments that Lee Cronin, who is the writer-director of this movie, has made. One of those is that he intentionally mentions that 3 books, that there are 3 volumes of the Naturum Demonto, or which is our name for Necronomicon, of course. And he specifically said, yes, there are 3 books, and those are the 3 books we saw in Army of Darkness. That those represent the 3 different copies. That it wasn't just...
What about the copy from Jason Goes to Hell?
I guess that was one of those copies that managed to make it into there, but...
Yeah.
But like that, but this one in specifically he said is the Bitey book. You remember the scene when Ash picks up the book and it's biting him?
Oh yeah, I remember that, yeah.
This is a take on that Bitey book, and of course this has teeth that open up. A lot of people refer to it as like the Harry Potter book because there's a scene scene in the third Harry Potter book where they have like a book about monsters that itself is a monster and it has a mouth on the same area of the book as it is in this movie. Kind of like a horrific version of that Harry Potter scene. This is also interesting because Evil Dead kind of established, I don't think it was the first, but it really established the cabin in the woods style horror movie.
Yes.
Of like, friends go out to a cabin, horrors happen. And it's not just Evil Dead, there's lots of movies that have done that, And this movie moved away from that. It went into like an apartment building.
Yes.
It takes place in Los Angeles, but it was filmed in New Zealand for Los Angeles, which is often the case. You film in a country where you get cheaper filming and that allows you to make the movie for less money. And you shoot it for a city instead of as the city. So it was filmed in New Zealand for Los Angeles. What's interesting about that is that this movie came out not too far after the last Scream movie, which also moved from its suburban suburban setting of the other movies to
an
New
urban
York.
setting.
Yes. And so basically Scream went to New York and Evil Dead went to Los Angeles.
So now we're in the era of urban horror.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, there's a movie called Barbarian that came out not too long ago. It takes place in Detroit.
Oh, yeah.
It's fantastic. It's really good. But anyways, as you mentioned, this was originally made as an HBO Max original movie, and then it eventually got a theatrical release. The production budget for this was $15 to $19 million. That's always kind of iffy on the totals of that. I don't really know what the marketing budget was, but 15 to 19 million is pretty low for current standards. That's pretty small. And it is, as we mentioned, the highest grossing film in the franchise at 146 million worldwide. So those are kind of like the little research details. Of course, as I mentioned, this was written and directed by Lee Cronin, who did the horror movie The Hole in the Ground. That's kind of his only major credit. He had some short film credits before that, but that's like his big credit before Evil Dead Rise. And this was produced by Sam Raimi, Rob Tapert, and Bruce Campbell. Kind of all the Evil Dead heads were back as producers on this.
Yeah.
Trying to think of where else I want to go in this discussion. I think that we pointed out about the family angle for this, which I think is really interesting that they took that with this. The 2013 Evil Dead movie kind of did something similar where it wasn't family, but I mean, there was some family, but that wasn't the angle they were going with. They were going for like a rehab angle with the 2013 Evil Dead remake, where it was like this girl who was a drug abuser, and the reason they went to the cabin was to try to get her clean and get her off of drugs. And that kind of takes away from the idea from the original Evil Dead of, it's just a bunch of friends visiting a cabin to hang out. And here they did that again, but they did this kind of family angle. And I like the way they did that this is like these sisters that seem to be close, but there's some distance between them. And the aunt really hasn't done the best for her family that she should have. She hasn't really stayed too much in touch. She realizes she's pregnant and goes off tour where she had worked as a guitar tech for a band and goes and visits her sister without realizing all the changes that have happened in her sister's life, including the fact that the building that this takes place in, that they're in, is going to be demolished. It's like in ruin. It's just not doing well. And then an earthquake happens in the movie, which just destroys the stairwell, ruins the elevator. Well, actually, the demon possession does that. And then, this is like just a really condemned building. Nobody should be living there.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, the aunt missed everything with the father leaving the family.
Yeah.
Her sister's family behind, and that creates kind of some awkward moments and tension, which are then later played on after the first act of setting that all up. It's played on with the animosity that the mother, as a Deadite, is using against her family, verbally, as she's attacking them physically as well. Yeah, I'm trying to think of where else to go. Okay, how about this? Most brutal scene. What was the thing that, made you want to turn away?
The most brutal scene, when she had the tattoo thing, the mother, who now possesses a Deadite, and she was going to put the needle in the daughter's eye, I was squirming. Like you said, yeah, they backed off from it. They didn't. I was kind of relieved, because if that, and then that would have been like, oh, yeah. Like, that is a sensitive spot for me, just because, like, I don't like the idea of, like, anything going in my eye, obviously.
I think it's just because they had planned, they wanted to do that eyeball suck out scene, and that happened, like, soon after, and they just didn't want to do, like, 2 eyeball scenes back to back. So they kind of stepped away from it. And that, again, it's an homage to the, you know, other Evil Dead movies, specifically Evil Dead 2, where there was a scene where there was a dead eye in the basement, and they jumped on top of the door to it, and it caused the eye to pop out and go into a girl's mouth.
Yes.
So it's kind of an homage to that. And so obviously that wouldn't have worked the same way with the tattoo gun scene. And so they kind of, it seems to me like they just said, we can't just do 2 eye things back to back.
Honestly, that was super brutal too, where she just jumped on him and like ripped his eye out with her mouth, you know, with her teeth.
Yeah.
Like damn.
That was, I think, the first sign that you knew that they were at least doing it right with the brutality in the sense of nobody's safe.
Yes.
You know, like you always wonder that when there's kids in a movie. Are they gonna go that extra step? Like, is a kid gonna be a victim? Yeah. And it's like, that scene in the hallway, there's a teenage kid, but also a younger kid who are both kind of brutally killed.
Yeah, they both die. Spoilers, everybody dies except for like 2 characters. So
yeah, everybody but 2 characters dies in this. But yeah, absolutely brutal. I think for me the most brutal scene, maybe it was the scissors going up the nostrils.
That was that's a good one.
Or similarly the doll-headed spike going through the back of the girl's head, and then her like slowly pulling it out.
What about like the cheese grater on the leg? It's not the most gory thing.
That didn't do as much for me as I thought it was going to do. They showed that in the trailer, and I thought like that's going to be brutal, and then it didn't have as much of an effect on me.
Well, because like it's just one thing, but damn, like that's
conceptually it's horrifying, but so is the glass eating is horrifying.
Well, like I said, it wasn't like most gory thing, but then like it doesn't need to be mountains of blood to be like
it's uncomfortable.
It just needs to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it. That'll wrap up our discussion. As I said, I have criticisms of the movie, and those come from a place of rabid, insane Evil Dead fandom that's inside of me.
Yeah.
If you put that on mute, not even like disregard it entirely, but just kind of, you know, level that down. Like, I really liked the movie. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was probably more than I was hoping for, actually. It ended up being actually better than I even thought it was going to be. Which, honestly, the red band trailer for this movie is probably the best horror movie trailer I've ever seen in my entire life. So, that does a good job of like how well it executed on that, because the trailer was so good. I was still kind of had some expectations that this might not be as good as I was hoping for, and I left thoroughly impressed, I should say. One of the things I also wanted to bring up real quick before we stop is that they also did a lot of like really cool cinematography in this movie, and little scenes, like the scene where she's cooking the eggs, and you kind of have her in the foreground and the family in the background, and they're both in focus, but there's like a middle ground between them that's out of focus. It's just like a really cool look. Or like the scene in the cold open part where the girl's reading the book, or she's reading it, and her sister's like reciting it. Her sister, who's like dead-eyed at that point, is like reciting what's in the book without seeing it. And the shot on the book, it has this like extreme close-up, and it's kind of blurred on the top and the bottom, and it's just a really cool looking shot. And there's a few of those in there that look good. And I think that that's important for horror films, because horror films need to be a bit groundbreaking when it comes to like technique. That's like a tradition in the genre, that like a lot of new ideas or new ways of shooting things are kind of experimented with in horror films where they usually aren't in other genres of film. Evil Dead in particular was like a big part of that. Like there's a lot of filmmakers that were heavily inspired by the original Evil Dead because of what it did with cameras. That was entirely new. Like nothing like that had ever happened before in movies at that point. So I just wanted to note that I appreciate some of the techniques and stuff that were used to give kind of an uncomfortable feeling in the movie.
Yes.
But that's it. That's it for our discussion of Evil Dead Rise. You can check that out on HBO Max, or just Max now, I guess. It's just Max. The movie is available there, and it is a really good, uncomfortable horror movie. I also highly recommend checking out reaction videos. Not one in particular, but just look look up Evil Dead Rise reaction, because it's really fun to watch people get super uncomfortable at some of the more horrifying scenes in the movie. It's fun to watch other people suffer. It's like the same way that people liked watching reaction videos of like the Red Wedding and Game of Thrones, because you want to see the people like get that look of horror on their face as they realize what's happening, you know? That same kind of like that same kind of feeling you can get by watching people react to like horror films, especially when they're like really brutal like this is. But that's it for our discussion of Evil Dead Rise. Next week we are going to be talking about Renfield. This is the Dracula movie starring Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult are both in this movie. Nicholas Hoult played Beast in the newer X-Men movies, and so it's a fun movie to check out. I've already seen that one. One thing I'll say is it is immaculately paced. It is very, very well paced. That's one thing I'll say about Renfield. That's my spoiler before we react to it. But that's it. Thank you everybody for listening. You can follow me on Twitter. I am at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, the RSS feed for the podcast, all that stuff you can find by going to our website, thetotalscreen.com. And if you open up any of the container stories for the podcast, you'll find all the relevant links within that story to our SoundCloud page, our RSS feed, all that stuff. So check that out. You can also subscribe to the podcast through any podcast client of choice like Apple Podcasts or Pocket Casts. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. Thank you everybody for listening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. Visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.